Hello, I'm Dr. Judith Boice. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of Health Essentials. Today we'll be talking about how food allergies and intolerances may be making you fat. A lot of people come to me and their food reactions are a big mystery to them. I'll say, you might be having some kind of food reaction going on. And they'll look at me funny and say, well, how could I be having a food reaction? I don't throw up after I eat. I don't have hives. My throat doesn't constrict. Those are examples of what are called immune globulin E anaphylactic reactions. Those are a very specific type of food reaction so that when people eat a food, they have an immediate anaphylactic reaction. So let's look at the different types of food reactions and then how those end up causing a whole range of potential health concerns, including making us fat. So let's look first at how we react to food. I think about the way we react to food being like blindfolding 10 people and having them describe an elephant. And you're going to get a radically different description depending on whether you're describing the trunk or the tail of that elephant. And some people will say, I want the right food test. Tell me the right food test to do. And my response is, well, is the trunk right and the leg wrong or the tail wrong? Each type of food testing gives us a different view, a different angle into understanding how the body is reacting to food. So what are some of those food reactions? I'm going to read to you quickly a list of some of the ways that our bodies can react to food. We've already said that food reactions can cause us to gain weight. Think about that as a way of buffering the inflammation that's caused by a food reaction. Inflammation is the common currency, the common denominator for all types of food reactions in the body. Each person has different areas that will be affected even by different foods. So for example, when I eat tomatoes, my gut cramps. It's like it's been tied into knots. If I eat yeast, I have a vaginal yeast infection, and then I'm more prone to developing a cold or the flu. It affects my immune system. So each person has a different way that even different foods can cause reactions in the body. Long story short, every single system in the body can be affected by food reactions. So a short but depressing list of the different ways that food can affect our being. One is anxiety, depression. Others are arthritis, asthma, cardio-obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD, autism, bedwetting in children, or chronic ear infections in children, chronic sinusitis, whether that's in adults or children, chronic respiratory infections. I know one of the things that finally prompted my family physician to order food testing when I was 13 years old was chronic bronchitis that had gone on for 3 to 4 months, so chronic respiratory infections. Eczema and other skin conditions, fatigue. Fatigue is a big one. Hay fever, other kinds of inhalant allergies, headaches, including migraines. One of the things that all of the different systems of medicine agree on is that food reactions are one of the primary causes of migraine headaches. There are a couple of foods that are true for all migraine sufferers. For example, red wine and aged cheese, but there are a whole bunch of other things that can be that particular person's food reactant. So it's not the same necessarily from person to person. And fertility, that's recent research that's showing that women who have difficulty conceiving may be unable to conceive because of chronic inflammatory reaction, which then prohibits the fertilization of the egg. Irritable bowel syndrome and other inflammatory bowel diseases, for example, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. Obesity, we've already talked about. Panic attacks. Anytime you're inflamed, if you have a tendency toward anxiety or more extremely towards panic attacks, the food can aggravate that. Stuffy nose, diabetes also can be either caused or aggravated by long-term food reactions. So how can you know if you're a candidate for food reactions? There are two major types of food reactions. Let's talk about those first, and then we'll talk about the testing. So one area of food reactions are what are called immune globulin reactions, true allergies. There's IgE. Those are immediate anaphylactic reactions that can take place anywhere from seconds up to 3 to 4 hours after you eat a food. If it's severe, you'll have hives and you can actually have throat and bronchial constriction and it can kill you. You can obviously have milder reactions than that though. It doesn't have to all IgE reactions are not anaphylactic reactions. So immune globulin E primarily affects the skin and the bronchial system, the respiratory system. That's where the immune globulin E cells primarily are in the body, or rather the immune globulin cell, the blood cells are in the body. Immune globulin G, IgG, can be delayed up to 4 days after eating them. So those are really difficult to track. You eat tomato soup on Monday, you feel like crap on Wednesday. That's really challenging to put together. Immune globulin A, IgA, affects only the gut, only in the intestinal system and the gut. So those are true allergic reactions. And I think about all of the different pathways in the body that cause those inflammatory reactions being like rivers that come down to the ocean. And the ocean is the final common inflammatory pathway in the body. So immune globulin E, immune globulin G, immune globulin A. Those are 3 rivers, inflammatory pathways that come down to the final common inflammatory pathway in the body. There are also a whole range of other inflammatory pathways like prostaglandin pathways, leukotriene pathways, and there are others that we probably don't even fully understand yet. Those inflammatory pathways or rivers I think of as the intolerances. They are also food reactions, but they don't fall under the immune globulin E, G, or A set. So those are the allergies. The intolerances are all of the other inflammatory pathways. All of those inflammatory pathways come together in the common final inflammatory pathway. So there are many types of food testing to see if you may be reacting on any of those different pathways. One of the tests that's considered the gold standard for food testing right now is the elimination diet. And in this particular form of food testing, you eat only hypoallergenic foods for 4 days, and then you introduce a small amount of a food and you wait up to 4 days, because remember, it can take up to 4 days to see a food reaction. And if you've had no reaction over those 4 days, then you eat a bunch of that food, you pig out on that food, and you wait another 4 days to see if you react. So it can take up to 8 days to test one food. So if you wanted to test 100 foods using the elimination diet, it could take you up to 800 days. That's 2.5 years. That's a long time. That's longer than most people are willing to invest in doing food testing. So the elimination diet is fabulous if you only want to test a few foods, like 6 to 8 foods. And it's also the other issue, the other challenge with the elimination diet is some people are already reacting to the supposed the hypoallergenic diet. So for example, one common hypoallergenic diet is rice, lamb, and pears. Well, I've had times when I've had severe reactions to all 3 of those things. So I'd already be reacting on the hypoallergenic diet. So that's an issue too. What's truly hypoallergenic, what's hypoallergenic for one person may not be hypoallergenic for another. The 3 allergy pathways we talked about can be tested by blood testing. And there are also blood tests that can look at those other intolerances. Each person may need to do one test or a whole range of different tests to get a view of the entire elephant. If you're interested in more information about the food testing, there's a link below that will give you access to a 60-minute free webinar that I've done on food testing. Long story short, there's no one-size-fits-all perfect test for each person, just like there's no one-size-fits-all diet for each person. If you take away nothing else from this talk, I hope that you take away the understanding that even super healthy foods are not necessarily healthy for you. So for example, there have been times when I've been reactive to spirulina. Spirulina is a fabulous superfood. Or people will bring to me an article they read in the health food magazine. Oh, blueberries. Blueberries are the bomb, aren't they? Aren't they fabulous? Shouldn't I be eating lots of blueberries? And I'll say, I don't know. I don't know if that's a good food for you or not. We need to do some testing to figure out if that's a good food for you. Of course, if someone eats blueberries and they have an immediate anaphylactic reaction, that's a no-brainer. That's easy. That's not a good food for you. But remember, those more subtle delayed reactions can take time. So why is weight gain one of the symptoms of food reactions? I think about the weight being a way of buffering food reactions. Fat is actually a very watery tissue, which we don't think about much in the West. In Chinese medicine, they think of extra fat as dampness in the body, and that actually makes some sense because fat is a fairly watery tissue. So when we're unknowingly or knowingly eating foods that we react to, the body holds more fat. almost as if it's trying to buffer the effects of the food. So when we take away our food intolerances, our food allergies from our diet, often we lose a gratis 1 to 5 pounds fairly quickly, and then over time we can lose quite a bit more weight as well. Here's another important takeaway. Simply eliminating the foods that you're reactive to will not necessarily heal the gut. When we've unknowingly been eating foods that we react to, the gut becomes inflamed and irritated. You can develop what's called leaky gut. There are what are called gap junctions, nice tight junctions when the intestine is healthy. They're nice tight gap junctions between the cells. But when the intestines become inflamed and irritated, those nice tight junctions become leaky. They become loose from the inflammation. Then larger molecules of food than normal can cross the intestinal barrier, and then the immune system can set up true allergic reactions to those macromolecules, those larger than normal molecules of food. So another important piece is not only taking away the foods that we're reactive to, but doing things to actually help restore and rebuild the digestive tract so that we don't just trade one set of food reactions for another. So for example, if someone's been reacting to wheat and they take wheat away and they've developed leaky gut and then they start eating a ton of corn, they may then become very reactive to corn because larger molecules of corn start moving across the intestinal barrier. So that's a whole nother discussion. How do we rebuild and restore the digestive tract? Bottom line take home for today is to understand that food reactions can affect every single system in the body, including causing us to gain weight, to hold on to more weight, more fat, to buffer the effects of the food reactions in the body. So if you're interested in achieving and maintaining your ideal weight, part of that whole picture, the whole program of being able to maintain your ideal weight can be to identify and then to remove the food intolerances, the food allergies from your diet, and to do things to restore and rebuild the digestive tract. So please do look below. There's a link to more information about food testing. It's a free 60-minute webinar, and there's also a handout below about the top 8 food allergens. And I'll read them to you, but there's a handout along with that list of potential food reactions in the body. So dairy, all forms of dairy, not just milk, but cheese, cottage cheese, yogurt, etc. Eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, so things like walnuts, almonds, pecans, soy, wheat, and for some people, it's not only wheat, it's all gluten-containing grains, for example, oats, rye, triticale, etc. Finned fish, so fish that have fins like salmon, haddock, tuna, and then shellfish. Shellfish are things like shrimp, lobster, crab. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will also be giving a webinar on, it's called Skinny Jeans After 50, on the Tuesday, January 30th. It's a free hour-long webinar, so join me if you're interested in achieving and maintaining your ideal weight this year. I look forward to joining you next week for another edition of Health Essentials. Thanks so much for joining me.